Hello and welcome to the Catholic Mama podcast. I'm your host, Christine Flynn. Thanks for joining me on this episode where I'm also joined by Dr. Michael Behe, who is a professor of biological sciences at Lehigh University. He is a PhD in biochemistry and has written several books, and which all lead up to our topic today on how to broach the conversation of evolution with your children. But those books include Darwin Devolves and Darwin's Black Box, as well as The Edge of Evolution. I know these books. I've seen them in my home, Dr. Behe, but I have yet to read them. But I know you've been a guest on my husband's show a number of times.
I have.
But now we get to talk a little bit. I'm going to step out of the way a little bit and ask you to introduce yourself to our listeners a little bit more.
Okay, nice to meet everybody. My name is Mike Behe. I'm, as Christine says, I teach biochemistry at Lehigh University, and I grew up in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and I'm Catholic, and I went to Catholic grade schools and high schools, and then I went to Drexel University for chemistry to study chemistry, and the University of Pennsylvania for biochemistry. And I guess the relevant thing is that as I was growing up, I didn't have any particular difficulties with the theory of evolution, even Darwinian evolution. As a matter of fact, we talked about it in parochial school. And the idea was that if God wanted to make life by natural laws and secondary causes, who were we to tell him he couldn't? That sounded okay to me. And it wasn't until I became an associate professor at Lehigh that I read a book called Evolution, a Theory and Crisis. And it was by a guy named Michael Denton, who was a geneticist in Australia. And he raised a lot of problems that the theory has. And he said that nobody had solved them. And I was startled because I had never heard of many of the things that he wrote about. And I didn't have the answers to them either. And I went to the science library and looked, and they didn't have answers either. So I was startled and I got mad because I thought I was being led to believe something, not because the evidence was so strong for it, but just because that's the way we're supposed to think these days. That's just what modern college-educated folks are supposed to assume. But again, there was no evidence that Darwin's mechanism of random changes, random mutation, and natural selection could build any of the marvels of biology. And especially at my level, I'm a biochemist. And so biochemistry studies the molecules of life in the cell and inside with DNA and proteins and stuff. And the deeper you go in, the more complex life becomes. It doesn't become less complex, it becomes more complex. And to make a long story short, I started to doubt Darwin's theory. And when you do that, you quickly realize that the only real explanation for this is intelligence, because when we see marvelous interacting machines, we always know that they were built by somebody. And so I wrote my first book, Darwin's Black Box, way back in 1996. And from then on, I was a marked man, and I continued along the path.
Okay. Yeah. I was shocked when I found out that there was any legitimate option besides either, young earth creationism or evolution. And I just found this out because of becoming Catholic and my husband doing his research and talking to you.
Yeah.
So I'm sure most of our listeners don't, or maybe they get an idea that there might be some other option, but through schooling, like you said, even in parochial school, you've been led to believe one thing.
Yeah.
So when I mentioned this before we hit record, but my children have started to ask questions about evolution. I joked that really their idea of evolution is just from one stage of a Pokemon to its, next one,
Yeah, it's
which we are all now experts in the family on that.
uh-huh.
Uh, but this idea of evolving or evolution has come up a few times in science books that they have or kids' encyclopedias. And I know that there are issues with it, but I don't even know how to explain the issues. So I'm hoping
Okay.
today in our time together, and the listeners will walk away with a better understanding. I'm going to defer to your expertise. If we're going to start explaining, even and also we've got to know it well enough that we can explain it simply for younger
Yeah.
children or
Mhm.
children of any age, I suppose. Where do we begin in even this whole big topic?
Yeah. Well, one thing is to be aware of a critical distinction, something that really trips up a lot of folks. And that's a distinction between long periods of time and common descent and Darwin's claim that random changes undirected by anybody, pointedly including God, when filtered through natural selection, can account for all of the marvels of life that we see.
Hmm.
As far as I'm concerned, I tell people I don't care about common descent because it simply says that, well, you know, different creatures in different groups have similar things uh, the hands or the limbs of bones of your limbs. And if a common ancestor had them and the different branches leading down to them inherited it, well, then we could understand why they have this feature. But if you'll notice, it doesn't say where the common ancestor came from. It doesn't say where these limbs came from in the first place. It doesn't say how these groups diversified into, whales and bats and so on. So it's really kind of it's interesting, might be an interesting fact about natural history, but it doesn't have much philosophical or theological or even scientific importance.
Hmm.
99.9% of the importance of Darwin's claim is found in natural selection. And he wrote that he thought this natural selection could filter out stuff and end up with things that appear to have been designed but weren't. And therefore, we should not think that there was any force or any intelligence or anything directing the development of life. So that's the most important claim. And it's also the claim that has, a total of zero evidence. And as a matter of fact, it has less than zero evidence. I was wondering if, I should stop and ask if you have questions, but then I'd show a slide or two to try to make these
Yeah,
things
sure.
clearer.
Yeah. So, listeners, I know that I've asked lately about if anybody was interested in YouTube videos, and I've heard yes. So, uh,
Uh-huh.
we're gonna try video as well. I'm gonna, I actually had a hard time getting my YouTube channel to work in video, but I'm gonna have put my faith in God that He's gonna want people to see your slides. Yes, yes, please do it. Share away.
Okay, great. Okay. So here, get up a PowerPoint slide. First one, this one. Okay. Here's a basic problem. Uh, Darwin didn't know much about the cell or about molecules just because back in the middle of the 1800s, nobody knew. But modern science has, gone down to the molecular depths of life, and we have discovered machines, quite literally, machines made out of molecules, and that's what runs the cell. This is a particularly visually striking machine. It's called the bacterial flagellum, and it is quite literally an outboard motor that can allow cells to swim. it's got a motor down here, something called a stator, which clamps it to the cell membrane to stop it from moving inappropriately. It's got, this is called the drive shaft, which is turned by the motor, and it turns this thing and eventually turns this long whip-like structure, which acts as the propeller. And let me tell you, I know this looks interesting, looks like some space age thing, but this is just a little cartoon version. Each one of these parts has thousands upon thousands of details that allow it to fulfill its role. So the overarching point is that the more that science has discovered about life, the more and more and more complex and intricate and elegant and sophisticated it's discovered to be. Okay, so
that looks very complicated.
Yeah,
You wouldn't think this was going on inside of something microscopic. Yeah.
This just gives a hint, but and one of the big problems for Darwin's theory is he says, yeah, okay, a mutation comes along, that changes something a little bit, and that helps. And so organisms that inherit that little mutation, they go on to outcompete everybody else and thrive. And then another mutation comes along, and if it helps, then that would build on the first. And so over time, he thought that this could explain pretty much everything in life. But there's a simple, basic problem for Darwin's theory, and it's illustrated here. It's something that I've called irreducible complexity. And that is, with machines, such as we find in the cell, they usually require a number of parts that are put together before they work. So here's a simple little mousetrap, which is a simple machine. And you can see it's got this wooden base and a spring and a hammer and so on. So if you wanted to evolve by random mutations, something like a mousetrap, how would you start? What would you do? And the answer is, well, suppose you started with a wooden platform, but that's not going to catch mice. And suppose you added this metal bar called the hammer, but that's not going to do anything. It doesn't work until everything's put together. So Darwin's theory doesn't work for things that require multiple changes to approach them. And if you think back to the flagellum, this is irreducibly complex too. If it didn't have the propeller, if it didn't have the drive shaft or the motor or the other parts, it just wouldn't work. It's not that it would work half as well or a quarter as well. It wouldn't work at all. So the point is that, this is not some freak exception. All of cellular life is run by systems and machines of similar sophistication. So let me go to another one. And this is me when I was an undergraduate. The question is, well, Darwin's theory has problems, but how do we recognize that something was purposely designed? And it turns out that the only way we can recognize design is what's called a purposeful arrangement of parts. When we see different parts, like in a mousetrap, that are put in relationship to each other so that they can do something, then we conclude that they were designed. And same thing with biochemical systems. Let me share a different screen because I don't have that correct slide on the other one. And let me just go down to here. As a matter of fact, here we go. Here's a Far Side cartoon. This is illustrate the point. We've got these jungle explorers here, and the first guy has been strung up and skewered. And this guy says, that's why I never walk in front. Okay, good advice. Uh, Now, the thing is that everybody who looks at this cartoon immediately realizes that this was designed. This was not, just some random stuff on the floor of the jungle. But how do you know that? Well, you know it because you see a number of parts that have been put together, arranged so that they have a function, the purposeful arrangement of parts. So I just use this. And as a matter of fact, I should say that the cartoon depends upon the reader or the viewer recognizing that this was designed. It depends for its humor on that. And so we all can recognize the purposeful arrangement of parts and intelligence through things like this. So the point is then that, that when we look at the bacterial flagellum, or any of a number of other things, we immediately see the purposeful arrangement of parts. And that's how we detect intelligence. So the positive argument for purposeful design is exactly that, the purposeful arrangement of parts.
Because there
Okay,
wouldn't, yeah, because I guess that you wouldn't be able to look at that and say, "Oh, this is just a haphazard, lucky collection
right,
that wound up
yeah,
making such a complex," especially, I mean, at such a small level. And like you said, it's not just a freak
right.
instance; that this is everywhere.
Right. Yeah. And it's at the very foundation of life. This is not some fluff or something. This is the
Right.
very foundation. And it's interesting because in Darwin's day, he didn't know about stuff like this. And they just knew about, tigers and bears and elephants and birds and fish. So he thought, well, cells are probably just protoplasm, squishy stuff, and nothing big deal. So he kind of hoped that maybe people or events could rearrange this squishy stuff into the forms that they were able to see
I
back
see.
then. But as science advanced, we found that it wasn't squishy stuff. It was this outrageously complex system. So it's kind of like looking at a jet plane. Say a passenger jet plane, you look at it from a distance, you say, wow, look, there it has wings and a tail and stuff. But I'll bet when you look at it more closely and on the inside, it will be simple. But no,
Yeah.
doesn't turn out that way. Well, it's the same thing with life. You can see dogs and they have hair and they have teeth and stuff. Okay. But when you look in the inside and at deeper and deeper levels, they become crazily sophisticated, elegant, and so on. And that's what it takes to make life work, it turns out.
Right.
We just didn't realize it until recently, pretty much.
So Darwin was doing what he could with the information he had, but once science
Yeah,
accelerated, right, then we could see these.
exactly. He for his day, it wasn't a bad idea. It was okay.
Yeah.
Most scientists, it turns out, were very skeptical of his idea, but eventually they got used to the idea that, well, science can explain everything, including
Mm.
biology, even if they didn't like Darwin's idea. But then they kind of talked themselves into it. There's a long kind of convoluted history, but it became the default theory, mostly because nobody could think of anything else that would work to explain this stuff. But it's surprising but true. You'd say to yourself, well, scientists who discovered this, well, what did they say about it? And it turns out they didn't say anything about how it might have evolved. And even to this day, I use this, the flagellum, I had it as the frontispiece. The front is in the front figure in Darwin's Black Box 25 years ago when it was published. And I made this argument that Darwin's theory couldn't explain it and that it required purposeful intelligent design. And people howled and got upset. And swore that they would, explain it within a few years or something. And it's been 25 years and nobody has even tried to do so.
Uh,
Not even tried. And these are smart guys who don't like this. But even they, even though they're smart, even though they're motivated, still can't explain how an unintelligent process could produce something like this, something so purposeful.
so then, uh, with the howling, I mean, you mentioned intelligent design, is designing intelligently. It, that is the alternative, right, to the
Yes.
typical evolution theory that we've. It's so funny because you hear the theory of evolution and yet it's proclaimed as law, scientific law.
Yeah.
And like I said, I went to school for cultural anthropology, so I went through the whole physical anthropology courses and how humans basically evolved from the mud. And it never came out. If intelligent design was spoken of at all, it was in passing and to be joked about.
Dismissive. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the case, but that's the only way that Darwin's theory survives is with social pressure. If you
Mm.
don't agree, you're a butt of a joke. Even if you got a PhD, even in a relevant area, you're still dumb if you don't understand that Darwin's theory is real. But if you look for evidence, like I did way back in the 90s, if you look at the Journal of Molecular Evolution, if you look at Evolutionary Biology, another journal, if you look at all the uh, places where scientists publish their research, you won't find anything. You won't
Mm.
find any explanation for any of this. You'll find a lot of hand waving. So
So
it's
is it because if you say Darwin's theory is incorrect, then you have to admit that there's a God? Is that the problem?
that's pretty much it. Yeah.
Okay.
So science, it's for a number of reasons. A number of people, are atheists and don't want design or don't want God to exist, and so they fight this tooth and nail. But also the culture of science says essentially we explain everything.
Uh,
We don't need no philosophers or theologians to help us along. We will explain it. So there's a lot of kind of other factors other than the science that
sure.
are brought to bear. Unfortunately, like me, if you don't look into this explicitly yourself or get exposed to it accidentally, who's going to doubt this claim? It's made by all the most prominent scientific organizations, and as you say, they ridicule anybody who doesn't play along. And so you've got to have pretty strong motivation um, to look into it and to dismiss it.
Hmm.
But I know that Catholic moms are motivated,
That's right.
and so they will look into it if they know it exists. Um, so I've got some recommendations for folks
Great.
if they uh, want some. Well, let me say that I and my wife and I we have kids. They're grown now, but we had 9 children, and so we talked about this over the years. And I, did not make a big deal out of it. We just pointed out that you know the relevant distinctions, the distinction between, whether, God allowed life to develop over time and whether, God is shoved out of the picture or purpose and teleology is shoved out of the picture. Kids love, caveman and dinosaurs and stuff like that. And so it's fun to talk about that. And you should talk about the fact that Earth has a history and life has a history. But be careful to make the distinction between, life developing, like say a baby develops in its mother over time, but it's on purpose. It's not an accident.
Mm-hmm.
So make the distinction between development and purpose. And if you do that, and if your kids are willing to listen, which some aren't, but many are, then they'll see the difference. And there are some published resources for homeschooling moms and Christian schools, parochial schools to use. And let me just say that there's a number of videos on YouTube and other places. And let me share my screen again, because I have these things pre-bookmarked, I believe. If I've got it somewhere. Where is that? That's not that. That's that. No. Oh, here it goes. Share. Oh, no. I stopped that share. Yeah, I'm not yet proficient in this.
Well, you knew more than I did about co-hosting when we started the podcast. So yeah, I was unprepared. We have, just encyclopedias and science books around the house. And I was unprepared because I didn't fully vet them. And the encyclopedia is like 1,000 pages
Yeah.
for the evolution section. So when my children have been reading through that and they've been asking questions, like, I don't know, I wasn't thinking about this yet. I knew we weren't gonna we're a ways off from having to deal with that in our own homeschool. And I wasn't prepared. So I'm glad to hear that there's things that I can.
Yeah. Well, almost nobody is. So don't feel bad. But I'm a member of something called the Discovery Institute. And that is the organization which promotes intelligent design. So if people go to discovery.org, the Discovery Institute's website, they've got this store and they'll sell you t-shirts and stuff. But they'll also have here, let's see, curricula where you can get educational materials. For example, this is a book called Discovering Intelligent Design. It's good for middle schoolers on up to high schoolers. And something here's a textbook called Explore Evolution, which contrasts the Darwinian explanation with an intelligent design explanation. And all of these things have lots of workbooks and teachers' supplies and so on. So if you want something formal like that, that's a good place to start.
That's good too, because I think many of the listeners were discerning and understanding that we can't just say, oh, evolution, no, don't talk about it, right? We want to have critical thinkers that can say, okay, here's some different ideas, and here's why this one's more likely and this one doesn't work.
It's great because it's so ripe for being exposed, and the claims are so outrageous that you'll look really brilliant to your kids. Here's another site that I'd like to bring to folks' attention. There's an organization called Illustra Media, and they're a Christian video producing outfit, and they support intelligent design. They've made some wonderful videos just about the marvels of life and making the point that, hey, these things are designed. They did not evolve. They talk about it, and it's nothing heavy, and it's got lots of nature scenes. They've made one called Living Waters about fish, about all the adaptations that are needed for it, flight, birds, and so on, and they're just marvelous. There's another one called Metamorphosis, in which they follow a caterpillar metamorphizing into a butterfly. And the thing is that you could show these these I'm showing you here, they're little clips, but you can get the full 45-minute or so video of each one, flight, fish, metamorphosis. They've got a number of other ones as well. And even young kids, if they see this marvel of nature, and the parent gently explains this, that God, gave these creatures the abilities to do that, even young kids will understand that. And then when they get older and there's more specific questions, you could go to the other resources.
Sure. That's great. Actually, we're
Yeah.
going through a marine life little summer school science
Oh,
thing right now with my children. So this is perfect timing.
yeah. Oh, that's great. That's great. Yeah.
Awesome.
And these are top-notch videos. They're really, mesmerizing even for grown-ups. They're really
Awesome.
nice. And
So yeah, I think this is good because I'm, like I said, I was caught unawares of how to explain all this stuff, and also it's not, this is something that other people are much better at than I am, and I know that
yeah,
it's a complex issue, and it's the the given that most people think. It's just that it's, of course, it's evolution. So
yeah,
just having some resources, and yeah, so I think too, I'm going to pitch your books then, because as an
yeah.
adult, I mean, of
Good.
course, it's so great to learn alongside of our children, and that can be a good springboard
Yeah.
for us. I remember when we converted to Catholicism, and I had joined some Catholic homeschooling online group, and I said, I'm nervous about teaching my kids the faith because I don't know it very well. And I had a number of veteran homeschooling parents reach out and say, you just learn it with your children. So the same with
Yeah.
evolution, right?
Yeah.
But we can go deeper too. So
Yeah, that's great.
out of your three books, what do you think would be a good start, the best starting point for someone?
The best start would be the first one, Darwin's
Okay.
Black Box. And it's pretty much just describes what has been found in the cell, like the flagellum and the blood clotting cascade and intracellular transport and the immune system and all sorts of stuff. And it's directed towards a general audience. So you're not
Okay.
expected to know anything in particular to be able to read it. And I just point out these very simple ideas that when you see things arranged, that's the hallmark of intelligence. And I also go through the scientific literature and show that nobody has ever even tried to explain in detail or seriously how a Darwinian process might make these things.
Hmm. Okay, I
So
got. Oh no, I was going to say, since my husband started reading your work and talking to you, I can't tell you how many times I've heard the phrase irreducible complexity in our
yeah,
home.
yeah,
I
right.
think, but he's and the flagellum. Outside of school, I did not anticipate hearing the flagellum
Yeah,
so
yeah,
often. But the way I've read and heard you explain it, and hearing my husband say it,
yeah.
it's
Well,
a
one good thing,
surprising but satisfying alternative to what we've been
yeah,
told all these years.
one good thing I think about going into this now is that a lot of people have become interested in microbes since the
Oh yeah, right.
pandemic and COVID and all that stuff. They see that they're not as simple as they might have imagined, and they can cause trouble, and
Yeah, but
and
no, it's
they
not
need
this gelatinous substance inside of things.
exactly. Yeah, yeah, that's right. So, but always keep in mind the difference between common descent and design and natural selection and random mutation. It's the random mutation. It's the pushing aside of intelligence of God, uh, so that science could explain everything. And
Mm.
here's one point where they simply can't.
Yeah, and
Science
it's
is
and it's showing
yes,
that they can.
absolutely,
Okay. So,
absolutely.
well, thank you so much, Dr. Behe. This has been very, very interesting. Where we talked a little bit about your books, and I'll put the links in the show notes so everyone can find them there. But where is a good spot to find you online and connect with you?
Oh, let's see. I don't really stay online too much, but if you go to the Discovery Institute, they have a link for their authors, and my name's there. You click on there, that'll take you to a lot of places. Also, you could go, there is a website, michaelbehe.com, all one word. The Discovery Institute set it up for me. I don't do
It must be nice.
but it has links to all my books and a
Great.
lot of my papers and posts and things like that.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Dr. Behe.
My pleasure.
All right. And like I said, everyone, I will put the links in the show notes that you can easily click and find everything we've talked about in today's episode. And I hope this has been helpful. If you have any other questions, specifically around evolution or just general how to teach your kids certain topics, let me know. I'd be interested to hear what those are. All right, everyone, until next time.